Hi everyone, welcome to the September 9th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragon, and I'll be joined very shortly by my co-host Craig Milkowski. This week on the podcast, we're going to take a look back at all of the racing from Labor Day weekend, and there was a lot of it. Obviously, the major focus was the Kentucky Derby, which was run on Saturday, and the card surrounding that. The entire weekend at Churchill Downs was just full of stakes races, including the Kentucky Oaks on Friday. We'll discuss all of that and really dissect some of the trips in that Kentucky Derby because there was a lot going on in that race with the upset, Tiz the Law losing, Authentic getting the victory, but plenty of horses in behind them didn't have ideal setups. We'll go through all of that, and we'll discuss all of that Grade 1 and graded stakes racing from Churchill Downs over the past weekend. Then we'll move on to Saratoga, discuss all of the stakes races, or most of the stakes races at least, from their Labor Day weekend, including the Grade 1 Woodward for the older horses. They ran a couple of Grade 1s for the 2-year-olds at Del Mar, which we'll talk about. And we'll finish things up at a couple of other venues, Monmouth Park and Laurel, where there were two pretty nice performances that we should touch upon. But Craig, the big focus here is on the Kentucky Derby. A September Kentucky Derby, some more mature 3-year-olds competing for the prize, and I think that's why maybe we saw a higher speed figure than we normally see in this race. But talk a little bit about the winner and the trips, because Authentic did get the job done, beating Tiz the Law, and what was a bit of an upset.
Yeah, he did, and I think he was one who was greatly helped by some of the early week scratches and also the scratch of his stablemate Thousand Words, who acted up in the paddock and actually flipped over, and basically all the other speeds came out of the race for the most part. And you know, Authentic's a really good horse. He only lost one race where he was second to Honor AP, and he earned the win. I mean, it was a clear lead. He used his speed to get it. It was a great ride by Johnny Velasquez. Resulted in a 129 TimeformUS speed figure, which is certainly above the average, which I think hovers around 123 or so. But as you mentioned, we have to consider that this race is being run 4 months later than usual, and that kind of fits with horses at this stage in their career improving a point to a point and a half a month. So I think it was a really good effort, but you know, I don't want to say that it was like the greatest Kentucky Derby we've ever seen, but it was certainly fast. I mean, the clock showed it was fast. The figures are showing it was fast. The surface was fast at Churchill, but again, so was the time of the Derby. So I had no problem making the figure that I did, and just a really good effort. I haven't looked ahead to see who's pointing to the Preakness, but there were certainly some trips in behind. I'll let you go ahead and talk about some of those if you like.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Authentic just was the best horse on the day. I didn't think Tiz the Law had a major excuse. I mean, if the connections of Tiz the Law had drawn up the race beforehand, I think they would have envisioned exactly the trip that he got. And Manny Franco did everything right, just couldn't get there at the end, and Authentic was able to hold him off. I got the sense that there was a bit of disappointment in the result, not just because of Tiz the Law losing. Authentic, for what he's accomplished and the fact that he's a Bob Baffert horse coming into the race, I guess maybe it's a little surprising that he paid $18 to win. But I think there was just some fatigue maybe with Bob Baffert winning the Kentucky Derby again, which I totally understand. I think a lot of people had sort of dismissed this horse as one that probably wouldn't want to go the distance. And maybe it's a little bit surprising that he turned away Tiz the Law at the end of this race. I will say I think the pace helped with that, and there's been a lot of discussion about the pace of this race. It was a moderate pace for the Kentucky Derby. If you look back at the history of the Kentucky Derby and the pace situations just in recent years, going back a decade, this is right in the middle of the pack. It's not one of the faster paces we've seen, and the way that the speed horses finished, I think, really confirms that, because the horses that were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the early going, they all finished in the top 8 of this Derby. It's not like anybody who was up close early just completely fell apart, and maybe that worked against some of the closers a little bit. All in all, though, I thought it was a pretty fair race from a pace standpoint, and maybe the horse that you'd point to as the one that was most compromised would be Honor AP. He was definitely farther back in the early going than I think most people would have predicted. I don't think anybody would have foreseen him in last place early. Some of the trouble at the start had something to do with that. He was sort of sideswiped when New York traffic came out a couple of paths out of the gate, but he was just kind of sluggish in the early going after that. Mike Smith was niggling at him a little bit, trying to get him involved in the race, and he just seemed a little bit unfocused and lazy, and I don't blame Mike Smith for going a little wide around the turns. I think he was trying to work out almost the kind of trip that Joel Rosario gave Orb back in 2013 when he stayed out wide from most horses, stayed outside of trouble, and looped the field. That kind of trip will work in a race where the pace falls apart, but it's not going to work in a race like this where the field was way more bunched and the speed horses just didn't come back. And Honore P ran on well to be fourth, but I didn't feel like just the way that the race set up was really going to work out for him. Mr. Big News, who was third, he ran well too. I thought Gabriel Saez gave him an excellent ride from mid-pack. Really, though, at the end of the day, aside from the fact that Authentic won the race, there weren't that many surprises for me in this race.
No, and I would say you said it was a good trip for Tiz the Law. It was a good trip for a Derby. If it was your typical two-turn route race on a Wednesday afternoon, you might give him a bit more of an excuse. But as you said, for the Kentucky Derby, that's about as good as you're going to get from as far out as he was. I think he wound up being the 15th horse out or 14th. I don't even remember now. But he wasn't in that dreaded 17 post that we've read so much about. And you're exactly right about the pace. We only have one fraction coded in red, and that was the mile. And so for a Kentucky Derby, which most of our baseline at Churchill for 10 furlong races is made up of the Kentucky Derby, there are occasionally a race here or there for older horses, starter allowances, things like that. But it was just kind of an average pace for a Derby. And when clear on the lead, he's going to be tough to run down. As you mentioned, the one horse I would give a bit of an excuse is Honor AP. Some of it was his own doing. He didn't break particularly sharp. I think he's a bit of a grinder. And then once he did get out of the gate, the horse from just inside of him, New York Traffic, kind of swerved over in front of him. So it was almost like he had to steady and start again. And for a horse that runs like him and just kind of grinds things down, that was a disaster for him. If we did incremental pace figures, he made a huge move from the 3/4 to the mile, by far the fastest in the race, where I think he made up about 3 lengths at a point where the race was getting faster to that one pace figure we haven't read. But I'm not sure what to do with him. He's a horse who's going to need things to go his own way. We know he's talented. He's the one horse who was able to beat Authentic at a shorter distance. So maybe with a better trip in a smaller field, he could do it. We'll just have to see. But I do think this is a really good group of 3-year-olds, even with some of the early defections that we saw.
Yeah, and we'll talk about some horses that could wind up in the Preakness a little bit later in this podcast, some new shooters, if you will. But I think the horses that are likely to go on to the race, Bob Baffert has said Authentic is likely to go. Tiz the Law's connections sound like they're a little on the fence. We'll see about some of the others. But it'll be interesting to see if these horses can take another step forward in the Preakness, because a lot of them were really targeted at this Kentucky Derby with schedules that were really manicured to make this race. And we'll see if they take another step forward later in the fall, and then the Breeders' Cup coming right after that. So it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out at the end of the season and who comes out on top. The 3-year-old fillies were in action on Friday in the Grade 1 Kentucky Oaks, and this was supposed to be the big showdown between Swiss Skydiver and Gamine. Gamine was the heavy favorite in this race off 2 dominant victories in the Acorn and the Test. The big question for her, though, was the 2 turns, and she failed that test here. They tried to set a pretty slow pace. She did let everybody else into the race as John Velasquez really slowed it down on the backstretch, but she had her shot at it at the top of the stretch and just couldn't go on with it. And Swiss Skydiver, who was sitting in behind her and maybe was going a little bit slower than they would have preferred, she also had her shot at it, and they just couldn't get past She Dares the Devil, who, credit to Florent Giroux, kept her in the right spot close to that slow pace and was able to take advantage.
Yeah, she sure was. It's a little bit surprising to me that this horse was able to take such a big jump, but she is a 3-year-old filly. She looked a little light on the figures coming in, but she had certainly run well, and pretty much every start this year was moving in the right direction, and it was just a big effort from her. Watching the race, I never got the impression she was going to back out of it. She always looked like she was ready to go and was going to be a danger once she set up that good early position just off of Gamine. And like you said, I didn't really see any excuses for the other ones. I think she was a deserving winner, if not a little bit surprising. She got a 1:23 TimeformUS speed figure, which is kind of in the neighborhood the 3 in behind her who had been running. So just a really good effort. And, like I say, you got to keep an eye out with these young horses because you never know when they're going to make that big jump.
One thing I will say about Gamine is that they sort of rode her like they were concerned, because she's really taken the bull by the horns in her recent races, going one turn, and John Velasquez seemed like he was very concerned with trying to slow down the pace as much as possible on the backstretch, and that works sometimes with speed horses. We'll talk about a few races on this podcast that featured extremely slow paces and routes on the dirt, but in this one, I thought she let everybody else into the race, and John Velasquez kind of put her in a situation at the quarter pole where she had to out sprint everybody to the wire, and I just don't know if that's the right strategy for a horse that's trying to get a longer distance for the first time. So it just didn't work out for her. Ultimately, she probably is best around one turn. And Swiss Skydiver, I thought she ran her race. She just ran into a horse that really improved here in She Dares the Devil. I didn't think Swiss Skydiver lost anything in defeat. She Dares the Devil just really improved, as you said. I didn't see it coming either, but she took a big step forward.
Yeah, and I will mention Gamine had something that you don't often see in big races like this, and the same thing could be said for Tiz the Law as well, and maybe they were a little bit exposed here. Not that Tiz the Law ran bad, because he certainly didn't, but neither one in our past performances had ever been in a race with a single red coded pace figure or fraction, so you never really know how it's going to work out. I mean, there wasn't red colored fractions in this one, but I think the pace was solid. The pace figures early were a little bit higher than the final time figure. So, it's just a question mark. And I don't think you want it to be taking short prices, which I don't think either one of us did in this case. But you don't want to be taking short prices on horses like this when they're probably going to have to do something they haven't done before. And that was go fast early.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, the one other thing I'll say about this race is that there was a little sense of disappointment afterwards that there was an upset, but these three horses are all really nice 3-year-old fillies, and they're running speed figures that suggest they're a very good crop of fillies. So I think I'm encouraged by that. If She Dares the Devil is able to hold this form, we'll see. But I thought it was a good running of the Kentucky Oaks, just not the expected result. Let's move on to some of the other stakes racing from this past weekend at Churchill Downs. The race before the Derby on Saturday was the Old Forester Turf Classic, that Grade 1 event, and Chad Brown had 3 in there. The somewhat surprising favorite was Sacred Life over his other horse, Rock Emperor, who was also highly regarded coming in, but it was sort of the other Chad Brown horse in Digital Age who was able to get the job done.
Yeah, we've seen that story play out before. I don't think we've ever gotten to the other Chad Brown as a winner. Maybe we have. I don't always remember those things, but all his horses are going to come ready. The betting was a little bit crazy in this race, if you ask me. I couldn't believe Sacred Life went off the favorite. It was a horse I liked, but wanted no parts of it. I think he wound up going off under 2-1, which was just nuts. It had a really good, solid pace in here set by Factor This, who had done very little, if anything, wrong. I don't think he'd lost a race all year, maybe to start the season. I can't remember if that was December or January, but he ran another big race on the lead battling and just didn't quite have enough to hold off Digital Age. He actually got a better speed figure from us with a 128 because of that quick pace in the winner, Digital Age. And as for the others, Rock Emperor, I'm really starting to wonder about him. He was a little cold on the board this time, but he just seems to be more a grade 2, grade 3 type to me than the grade 1 he keeps, for the most part, was getting bet like he is until this day.
Yeah, I'm personally not the biggest fan of Rock Emperor. I, too, was surprised to see Sacred Life go off so short. I picked him in this race. I was thinking he'd be about 6-1, and I'm just very surprised by the betting as well. Digital Age, though, I mean, he looked like the third most likely winner on paper among the Chad Brown horses. He had just been kind of a disappointment ever since winning that American Turf at Churchill Downs last year as a 3-year-old. He hadn't really gone on. He did look good winning an optional claiming race recently in New York, but maybe it was just getting back to that Churchill Downs surface because that was the site of his biggest victory last year, and he obviously loved it once again on Saturday. We'll see if he can go on and maintain this level of performance, but this was a big step forward for him. I agree with you. Factor This ran really well to be second. The pace, some fractions are color-coded red. It was a pretty honest pace, and he did well to hang on here. He's just been in great form for Brad Cox all year. Felt like a strong race, if a somewhat unexpected result as far as the winner goes. But I agree with you. I think that the winner just ran the best race.
Yeah, I'm curious, where do you go with a horse like Factor This if we're talking Breeders' Cup, which is going to be coming in soon? Because a mile is probably too short for him. A mile and a half is certainly too long. So sometimes I feel a little bad for horses like him. He's not really going to have a spot on Breeders' Cup Day, but he's certainly one I wouldn't mind having in my barn if I had one, because he is just in top form and held it all year, and one of the better horses in the division.
Now, that's totally true. I don't know what the right distance is for him, but there are plenty of other races outside the Breeders' Cup that he could point to. Stay on the turf and talk about the fillies and mares. Earlier on Saturday, they ran the Distaff Turf Mile Grade 2 event, and Chad Brown was heavily favored to win this one with his filly Newspaper of Record, and she just did what we came accustomed to seeing from her last year. She got what I thought was a perfect trip, setting a moderate pace, came into the stretch, looked like she was going to pull away, and then in the last eighth of a mile, she just kind of gave it up. I don't really have a major excuse for her. Beau Recall was there to take advantage, and Newspaper of Record just sort of let her run on by.
Yeah, I have to admit I got in a little bit of trouble this race because my wife wanted to bet Beau Recall, and I got shut out because I was watching on NBC, and the lag was a little bit too much. So she got over it a little bit later, but I was in the doghouse for this one for a bit. But yeah, as far as the race went, Newspaper of Record, no real excuses. She ran her race. I wonder if it was just a little too firm. Maybe there is something to that. She just likes a horse that's more soft. I mean, this turf did have some give in it. We only had it a 7, but her best races have come on lower on our track speed rating, 6 and below. So not sure how much of if we'd even call that an excuse, because you don't want to have to count on a yielding or soft turf course to win your races. But she showed she's a good horse, but on that firmer turf, she still couldn't hold off a really good, classy mare like Beau Recall, who just not sure. I forget what exactly happened with her last time. I know I kind of gave her an excuse, but she got back to her good races, ran another 125 time U.S. speed figure, and is as good as ever.
Yeah, I mean, Beau Recall has been a good horse all along. I mean, she was actually just second in the Just a Game a couple months ago to Newspaper of Record. But as you said, that was a race that was run over less than firm going, and Newspaper of Record obviously relishes that kind of course. And it also could be just something about the stretch out to 2 turns. I know she did it in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies turf as a 2-year-old, but generally she's been best around 1 turn, and especially in her first couple of starts this year. And there's just something about, I think, relaxing going the 2 turns that she just doesn't seem able to do. And she's not the kind of horse that can sort of back down the pace and sprint for home, which is what you want to be able to do as a front runner in these 2-turn turf races. She just doesn't have that late kick, and it leaves her vulnerable to a really good closer, which she encountered in Beau Recall here. So I'm not really sure what the answer is with the Newspaper of Record, or where they go with her from here, because she's so finicky and it's hard to find the right set of circumstances for her. I mean, Chad Brown probably won't do this, but maybe the right thing to do is to target a big race in Europe where they have a long straightaway and plenty of give in the ground. That might work for her, but I don't know. It's hard to find the right race in this country for her.
Yeah, I'd almost be wondering if she's worth a shot in the Breeders' Cup turf sprint, but I'll leave those kind of decisions to Chad Brown.
Let's stick with the fillies and mares and go back to the dirt course. And on Friday, we saw the Grade 1 La Troyenne as Monomoy Girl, no surprise, continued her winning ways so far in 2020. It's pretty amazing that this mare, I should say, has gotten back to her best form after having so much time off. I know you were maybe a little bit skeptical if she was the same Monomoy Girl after her first couple of performances this year, but she did take a step forward on the speed figure scale this time.
Yeah, she did. I mean, I assumed she was, to be honest. She just hadn't shown it in speed figures, mostly because she hadn't had to, but she certainly did on this day. She got a 123 TimeformUS speed figure, and I'm not sure that couldn't even been a little bit better if they really pushed with her. But just another really good effort from her. Just an amazing filly. Or I think is she a mare now? I can't remember. Yeah, I think she's a mare now. She turned 5 with that missed 4-year-old season. So one of the more fun horses. Looking forward to some matchups that we haven't seen yet with maybe Midnight Bisou. She was able to easily beat Vexatious in here, the one that beat Midnight Bisou. And personally, I don't think it would be all that good of a matchup, but I know it's one people like to see. But I think she's clearly the top filly and mare in training.
Yeah, this was a really solid performance. The pace of this race was pretty quick, and she was not that far off it. And she made an early move after the leader, Lady Kate, and got there in the stretch. And I will say, Lady Kate ran really well in this race because she was setting that fast pace, and she battled back pretty gamely through the stretch to finish a clear second in here. She's just really improved lately, but obviously Monomoy Girl is just superior.
Yeah, I do want to mention it was really good to see, and we're going to talk about some more horses that it's really nice when horses are used, that their speed is used, as we saw with this one. We're going to talk about Serengeti Empress. And Authentic even was one where it's a speed horse, and maybe you're going a little quicker than would seem ideal on paper. But there's always something about getting clear, and Lady Kate showed it here. She was able to just run all the other horses into the ground. She couldn't hold off a champion like Monomoy Girl, but there were a lot of good horses in between her that just couldn't catch her.
And that's a perfect transition into the next race we're going to talk about. Right before the La Troyenne, they ran the Grade 2 Ali Sheba for the older colts and geldings. And the speed was not used in this race. I think that's fair to say. I don't know what is going through the minds of the riders when they go the first quarter in 25-3 in a mile and the 16th race on the dirt. That is just a help to nobody. I don't understand how a race can get run in this fashion.
No, especially a grade 2 on dirt for older males. It makes no sense to me whatsoever. When Owendale was close up, you had to know something weird was going on. I mean, he's never that close, and after a quarter mile, he was only a length behind. But the pace figure for that race shows he only ran a 49 pace figure to do that, which it's just insane. As a handicapper, I don't think you can put a whole lot of stock in this race when the horses run back. I'd just be willing to put a line through it and say that it just doesn't mean anything, the speed figures. I used a pace breakout for the race, and they did finish really fast, but I mean, of course they did. We're talking really good older males who were basically allowed to walk for 3/4 of a mile at way below what they could normally do. So just as a fan, these kind of races are disappointing to me. I'm sure the connections of By My Standards weren't disappointed. He was a willing and a very good winner, but once Mr. Freeze just packed it in, and I have no idea what's happened to him this year. He's kind of fallen off a cliff to pack it in off that pace, but once he did, he inherited the lead, and the race was basically over at that point.
Yeah, and I'll say this. I don't understand. The thing I don't understand about these races is that, okay, Mandy Franco got to the front on Mr. Freeze and backed down the pace to just a ridiculous degree. I kind of doubt Dale Romans sent instructions to go almost 26 to the first quarter. That's not really his style. And some of these riders think it's a good strategy to go that slowly on a front runner. It's not. It actually hurts you. It doesn't help you. But I don't understand how the riders in behind don't just go on with it. I mean, it's like once they get past the first quarter, it's a no passing zone until you get to the stretch. I don't understand that, how nobody tries to break the race open and try to help their cause. I mean, Florent Geroux tried to do that a little bit with Owendale, and I'll credit Florent Geroux because he was aggressively riding throughout this entire weekend, and it really helped him, especially on She Dares the Devil. And that helped Owendale at least get a piece of this race because he's not a horse that would have been as close as that just looking at the projection going into the race. But I don't understand why nobody goes up and presses the pace and just tries to change the situation when somebody up front is making a really bad choice. Though I mean, credit to By My Standards, because By My Standards just seems to be able to adapt to any pace situation. I actually think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is the second victory this year where he's been in a race that you had to adjust based on pace. I think the New Orleans Classic was the exact same situation, and he just seems to be able to adapt to these situations. And he's a really good horse. It's just unfortunate to see races get run like this.
Yeah, you are correct about that New Orleans handicap. It's kind of like races these days. I know we talked during the quarantine period about how we were playing Gallop Racer and things like that, where the gate opens and you press the button a few times to get position, and then you just kind of watch the race until you hit the stretch and do something again. And it seems like that's the new trend in racing. We're not getting many more the Mike Smith moves we used to get on Midnight Bisou, where he'd recognize the pace was slow and just say, forget this, I'm going, and you guys can do what you want, and we're just not seeing it, and it really is perplexing.
Even those computer jockeys make middle moves sometimes, I'm just going to say. Let's talk about a race that featured a much faster pace, and probably the fastest pace that we saw all weekend in the Grade 1 Derby City Distaff. Belle's the one. I don't want to take anything away from her. She won this race and got a good bob to do so. Also got a great pace setup coming from off of it, but it was kind of heartbreaking to see Serengeti Empress lose.
Yeah, it was. And watching the race, I actually thought Serengeti Empress had held on. I mean, it was really, really tight. And I was disappointed to see the photo. It was just a really big effort from her. She fought with Bellafina, who I think was kind of surprising that she was actually up there doing the one dueling with Serengeti Empress. But I guess somebody had to take it to her. And the fractions were hot, obviously. Our pace figures were huge. The opening quarter mile was actually 160, which is really hard to do in a sprint race to go that much above the average to get that big of a pace figure. But those two laid it down. Serengeti Empress put her away and just didn't have enough to hold off Belle's the one. As you said, she's one that has shown she can run a fast race and take advantage of these situations before. She did so two back and was able to here. But just to show how fast the pace was, Belle's the one wound up with a pace-adjusted 118 Timeform US speed figure, whereas Serengeti Empress got a huge 130.
Yeah, I can't remember the last time that I saw at least a filly or mare earn a 130 Timeform US speed figure and lose a race. It's probably been a while. I can't think of one off the top of my head. But she ran in just an enormous race here, Serengeti Empress. And I mean, it was just so encouraging to see her try to battle back at the end. I mean, Belle's the one had all the momentum and looked like she was going to blow by or win by a length. And Serengeti Empress just tried so hard to hold on to that lead. And even on the gallop out, she didn't let Belle's the one get by. She actually pulled away after the wire. Just a huge effort. And they've really found what this filly wants to do, Serengeti Empress. She's a one-turn horse, and she's going to put on a show in one of these races at some point when she gets a more favorable pace setup, because she hasn't gotten it this time or in the ballerina prior to this when she actually won. We'll see how the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Sprint comes up, which is, I imagine, where she's going next. But she really deserves to win that race.
Yeah, I mean, this was a good deep field. Shout out to my buddy CJ Johnson. His horse Sally's Curlin was able to finish third in a grade one, so good for her. But I mean, we had CC in here, who's won some grade ones earlier in the year, ran well on the turn back, but just couldn't keep up with this kind of speed.
And, I said that the fastest pace we saw all weekend was in this Derby City Distaff, but it's probably pretty close because we saw another very fast pace on Friday in the 8 Bells going the same distance for the 3-year-old fillies. And I love to see races get run like this, where there are two speed horses that just duke it out on the front end, take no prisoners, and unfortunately they both ended up losing this race, but I don't think they lost any stature in defeat, because Monday Call and Four Graces, they really just went after each other every step of the way, and Four Graces in particular put that horse away and just got nailed at the end by Sconson, who got a perfect trip, kind of like Belle's the one in the Derby City Distaff, but this was a fun race to watch.
Yeah, these are some serious filly sprinters here. I had mentioned this was a race I was really looking forward to on Friday, and it didn't disappoint. Four Graces had run huge last time out. I think it was at Keeneland during that 1 week they ran in July at the about 7 furlong distance and came up with a huge number. Monday Call came in off a fast race as well, and these two just kind of hooked it up. I wouldn't say that for sure Four Graces is the better of the two. I think the post position probably helped her out a little bit, having that outside post, but both of them ran really well, but Sconson was the one able to take advantage. She got a nice 119 Timeform US speed figure, but similar to the to Serengeti Empress race, that was only the third best in the field, as Four Graces got a 123 and Monday Call back and forth got a 122. So, as much as we're talking about how good Serengeti Empress was, if one or two of these decided to show up in the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Sprint, there's no guarantee she would have any easy trip on the front end again, because these are some fast fillies.
No, I mean, we'll see if these horses all stay healthy, but that filly and mare sprint could be a fantastic race. I mean, with these horses, and if Gamine turns back, and we'll talk about a horse at Saratoga that might not be this good, but another speed horse in the mix, and that could be another race that features a very fast pace and one with just a lot of quality to it. So that's something to look forward to if all of these horses stay healthy. I agree with you. I was using a little hyperbole when I said this pace was close to the Derby City Distaff. I mean, it wasn't. This was another fast pace, but the Serengeti Empress went much faster in the early going than these horses did, and this race still fell apart. Sconson's a good horse. She had just been soundly beaten by Four Grace's Ed Monday Call in her 2 prior races. She just needed a better pace setup here and got it. But I kind of think she's the 3rd best horse coming out of this, and we'll see if she gets another favorable pace setup again. Staying with the 3-year-old fillies, on the turf on Friday, they ran the Grade 2 Edgewood, and no surprise here, as Sharing was the odds-on favorite in her first start back from Royal Ascot, and just did what she was expected to do.
Yeah, she's a good horse. Probably don't need to spend a lot of time on this. I think this is probably a prep for that Grade 1 they run at Keeneland of the name I forget, but she won it easily as she was supposed to. She got a 112 TimeformUS speed figure, really solid for 3-year-olds this time of year, and just the best horse in here. I mean, Hendy Wood, she's nice. She ran her race, got a good second, but Sharing's just better than these.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to say about this one. She's going to have to run faster if she eventually takes on older horses, but as you were saying, I don't think that's going to be in the cards for her too soon because they've got that big QE2, the Grade 1 race at Keeneland in the fall for 3-year-old fillies, so we'll see where she goes, but just a good first race back for her. We saw the 3-year-old colts go at it in the male version of this race on Saturday, the Grade 2 American Turf. And Fancy Liquor, who was the other Mike Maker horse in this race, was able to take advantage. Somewhat surprising to see him behind the other horse for Mike Maker, Field Pass, in the early going, because just looking at how the race set up on paper, it seemed like there were 4 speed horses and Field Pass was going to sit the perfect trip. He did sit a pretty good trip and he got there, but Fancy Liquor was actually behind him in the early going and was the one that was able to make the last run.
Yeah, I mean, he ran a really good race. He got a 115 TimeformUS speed figure for the win. As you say, I do think he tripped out a little bit. I think the results could have changed around, as we so often see in turf races, but just really good ride by Florent Giroux, which is hardly surprising. He always seems to make the right move, but I'm with you. I never in a million years would have envisioned this horse would be 11 lengths behind after a half mile into the race. Coming off, I think, a wire-to-wire score last time out. So just a really good effort, a really good ride. And the other surprise for me was Tyshawn running. I thought he ran really well on turf, made up a lot of ground late. He was one I just kind of suspected this was a guess to see because he hadn't been running well on dirt. But Richard Baltus knows how to get these horses running on turf, and he did that with Tyshawn.
Yeah, and we should mention Smooth Like Straight, because Smooth Like Straight ran really well in here. He finished off the board and he was 4th, but the early pace of this race was just kind of ridiculously fast. I mean, I like to see competitive paces, but these horses really went at it on the front end. I mean, early pace figures of the high to mid 160s in a mile and the 16th turf race is just unreasonably fast, and Smooth Like Straight was chasing really on top of that pace, 3 wide around the track. That's just not a trip that's going to be successful on the turf, and he battled back pretty gamely at the end to only lose this race by about 3 lengths. So he's a talented horse, just he's not going to win with this kind of pace setup.
Yeah, and he actually did get the best TimeformUS speed figure in here, a 118 compared to the winner's 117. And it's not often you see in a turf race the kind of chasm we get looking at the chart. The top 4 were all between 116 and 118, and then it drops off to everything right around the 100 mark or below. So in turf races, there's normally not that kind of drop off, but the bottom 3 just clearly packed it in. They were all long shots. 2 of them were part of the pace. So kind of a weirdly run race, as you say, but, some good efforts. I think this is a good group of 3-year-olds.
Smooth Like Straight might have disappointed for the Mike McCarthy barn of the American Turf, but they got some redemption in the very next race, the Pat Day Mile, as Rushy was able to win this race on the turn back and distance. This race was hurt a little bit by scratches, as the horse that was expected to set the pace in this race, No Parole, came out and it took a lot of speed out of the race. I don't know how much that changed things ultimately with regard to the winner, Rushy, who was probably just best anyway. But he really relished the turn back to one turn and ran a decent enough speed figure.
Yeah, he did. And Cezanne came out as well, who was probably going to be the favorite or one of them for Bob Baffert. But yeah, Rushy ran well. He set a good trip. It wasn't like the pace was anything fast. If anything, it was on the tepid side. Not quite enough to be in blue in our figures, but he didn't have a whole lot to run into. He got a good aggressive ride from Castellano and wound up with a 117 TimeformUS speed figure. Sonneman, who hadn't run particularly well as of late, ran a really big race to get up for second. Tapit the win, he just kind of ran the same race he's been running. So, it's not a whole lot to take out of this one. I think we saw some maybe grade two. Grade two is probably pushing it. Figure-wise, it's more like a grade three race. And no real surprises other than Sonneman, who was a big price, kind of rebounding to some prior good races. But otherwise, it wasn't the strongest race. Not sure what happened to Echo Town. Maybe it's just a little bit too far from him, and he'll turn back in distance. But no other surprises for me.
And let's wrap up the Churchill Downs action with the final race we're talking about from last weekend in Kentucky. That was the Grade 3 Iroquois for the 2-year-olds on Saturday, as Sittin' on Go won this race pretty impressively from off the pace. Came with a strong stretch run, pulled away in the late stages, and earned a pretty respectable speed figure for a 2-year-old.
He did. He got a 109 for the win, a jump up from his 77 first time out going 5 furlongs. I have to say, I'm sure I was probably like you. I did so many podcasts last week, I can't remember where I said it, but you just can't bet these 2-year-olds stretching out based on prior speed figures, as the ride of a lifetime was bet off his big numbers, because they just don't mean a whole lot, and you're usually going to take the worst of it at the window. I'm not saying I would have come up with Sitting on Go had I bet the race. These kind of don't generally interest me, but I do think you got to look for more prices and horses who are bred to go longer, and don't be surprised when horses make these big jumps like Sitting on Go did. I don't think there's anything phony about the big speed figure. I mean, it was a race after Rushy at the same exact distance, so and the track was really consistent on the day. So these things happen with 2-year-olds, and be ready for it as bettors. They're going to make these kind of leaps.
It was a funny race to handicap because you had the ride of a lifetime, who had a gigantic speed figure edge on this field, but he had run those speed figures sprinting, and then you had a bunch of 2-year-olds, mostly coming from Ellis Park, who would all run a lot slower, but most of them were bred to go longer, and they figured to improve, and the one that improved the most was Sitting on Go. Just looks like a nice horse for Dale Romans, and we've seen him do this plenty of the time. He actually did it on Friday as well in the Pocahontas, a race we're not going to talk about, but the same thing. A 2-year-old stretching out off a sprint debut win, got the victory, going a mile. Sitting on Go has kind of a funny pedigree. He's actually very closely inbred to Giant's Causeway. His sire, Brody's Cause, is by Giant's Causeway, and his dam is out of a Giant's Causeway mare, so you don't often see that level of inbreeding among top horses. But apparently it's worked out for him, and it looks like an exciting 2-year-old as the races get longer down the line. Let's move on to Saratoga and talk about some of the races from this past Labor Day weekend. The feature on Saturday was the Grade 1 Woodward, which was lengthened to 1.25 miles this year. Some people thought that might work against the horse that actually won this race, Global Campaign, because there were some distance questions for him coming into this race, and perhaps that's why Tacitus was such a heavy favorite in here. But the way that the race actually played out kind of worked to Global Campaign's favor, because they went pretty slow early, then they really picked up the pace halfway through, and Global Campaign was just able to outsprint them to the wire.
Yeah, he was, and I think it was a career best TimeformUS speed figure for him, a 125. He's obviously a horse we've talked about a lot. He showed a lot of promise at 3 and got derailed by some injuries, but he's come back really good this year, including his last 2 wins. Tacitus, granted, there wasn't a lot of pace in here, but who even knows what Tacitus's running style is? He doesn't seem to have one. You never know what you're going to get from him, and I don't really think he had any excuses. I mean, he was right there on the hip of Global Campaign. He could never get in front of him, and Global Campaign just outkicked him through the lane. So in this case, I think the best horse won the race, and that 125 is solid. Not quite up the Grade 1 level of the grading from a figure standpoint, but from what we've seen this year, outside of a few like Improbable and Tom's d'Etat, he's right there with the rest of the crop.
Yeah, it's just really unusual to see sectional splits like you saw in this race. I mean, they went the first half mile in 48 and 4, and I think they went the second half mile after that in something like 46 and 3, speeding up by over 2 seconds. You just rarely see that kind of disparity, and obviously that's going to work in favor of the front runners. Like you, though, I thought Tacitus had no excuse. He was right on top of that pace, and Global Campaign just kicked away from him late. It probably hurt the horses in behind. I don't think they were winning under any circumstances, though. It was just kind of that merry-go-round race that you typically see with paces like this.
Yeah, well, you can really see it if you look at the running line of spin off. He's a horse who's kind of a grinder. And when the pace picked up, he was up close and he just couldn't keep up. And then he came running again late a little bit to only be beaten a little under 4 lengths. But as you say, it's just a really unusual running line. I do want to give props to Luis Saez, who just was riding. I mean, what a tear he was on the last couple weeks. It would have been interesting to see how close he could have got to the top had he not had COVID-19 and had to miss some time, but he didn't win any riding title, but he was clearly the best rider at the end of the meet at Saratoga.
Yeah, I think some of the other riders should pay attention to not just what Luis Saez does during the races, but what he does before the races and how he warms his horses up, gets them to break on top, and is able to just control races because of those fast breaks and the way he uses horses out of the starting gate, especially in turf races. I think if we saw more riders taking cues from those kinds of tactics, we'd see some more competitive races, and some riders might have more success if they took a few cues from that playbook. Let's move on to another race from Saturday. That was the Grade 2 Jim Dandy, also going 2 turns on the dirt course, this one for the 3-year-olds. Typically, the Jim Dandy is a prep for the Travers. This year, maybe it's a prep for the Preakness, as Mystic Guide, a late developing 3-year-old, was able to get the job done here. As you know, Craig, I've been a fan of this horse for a while, and it's nice to finally see him putting all things together. It seems like the blinkers got him a little more focused in this race.
Yeah, they did, because I mean, it wasn't a super hot pace or anything like that, but it was solid enough. The pace figures were faster than the final time figure, and he was able to stay more in contact and just seem more focused throughout the race. And to me, once they hit the backstretch, he kind of always looked like a winner. He did it with a best 117, career best for him, TimeformUS speed figure. He'd still have to take a pretty big jump to compete with the horses we saw in the Kentucky Derby, but he's certainly one that's moving in the right direction. I can't say there's anybody else in this field I think his mate would fit into that same category. He's the one I would want out for sure, which is not a surprise being the winner, but sometimes we like to look a little deeper than that, but I just didn't see it here.
And by the way, I have seen no reporting on whether or not Mystic Guide is pointing to the Preakness. I mean, that would be a logical next step for a horse that's moving up like this, but we'll see, because that's coming up pretty tough race, as you said. The 3-year-old fillies ran a sprint race on Saturday, the Grade 2 Prioress. Frank's Roquette got the job done. She's a horse that hasn't really stepped forward that much from a speed figure standpoint since early in the year, but she's also benefited from a few slow paces, and that will hold down the TimeformUS speed figures sometimes. She was just better than these horses.
Yeah, she was. She's a horse. She's really tough to get a read on. She has a mix of red and blue fractions in her PPs, and every time she gets blue, she wins. And the time she had red, she was beaten, but not badly. It's not like she's run bad. She ran second both times, so I'm not sure what to make of her. She got a 114 for this effort on our figures. As you say, it was probably held back a little bit by pace. It's not one of those pace-adjusted figures that we're forced to do sometimes. The pace wasn't that slow, and she's shown she's not a horse that has to have the lead. She can sit off of it, so she's kind of a tough read for me at this point. I mean, it would be hard to see her beating horses like we saw at Churchill in 4 Graces and maybe even Wisconsin and Monday Call, but she's certainly right there. I'm not sure what's pointed next for her, but it would sure be an interesting matchup.
Yeah, I kind of am on the same page as you. She seems like one that could be exposed if she runs into a horse like Monday Call or 4 Graces. We'll see if she can be effective with a different running style coming from off the pace, but they haven't really ridden her that way yet. So I'd be a little bit wary of her moving forward, but we'll see how she continues to develop. Let's move on to some 2-year-old races. We'll finish up Saratoga by talking about a couple of them and then move straight into Del Mar. All of these are Grade 1 races that are typically run at this spot on the calendar, beginning with the Grade 1 hopeful on closing day at Saratoga. And this is one of the most impressive hopefuls that I think we've seen in the past few years, as Jackie's Warrior, who was an impressive winner of the Saratoga Special, took the next step forward in this hopeful and just ran a couple of really fast maiden winners off their feet. Reinvestment Risk took a good shot at him in the stretch, and Jackie's Warrior just held him at bay all the way to the wire.
Yeah, this was an impressive effort visually, and it was also an impressive effort from a speed figure perspective. It's going to be about a 116. I just uploaded these this morning, so it's not in the charts yet, but by the time people listen to this, it should be, if not soon after. And yeah, just a really big effort. Surprisingly, this horse didn't even go off the favorite. Reinvestment Risk did off that big maiden win. But I mean, clearly this is a really talented sprinter. I am curious to see what you think about how far she can go. We've obviously seen McLean's Music horses who can stretch out, but what do you think about this one?
It's hard to say. There are definitely some good horses in his pedigree on the bottom side. Some versatile horses, ones that were successful going sprint distances as well as distances around a mile. It's really hard to say based on the female pedigree. And the McLean's Musics, you think of them as being very fast horses, but McLean's Music has gotten plenty of horses that could go route distances, including Cloud Computing, who won the Preakness. So we'll see. He's definitely fast right now, and I imagine getting a mile is not going to be a problem for him just based on this performance and the fact that he set a pretty quick pace and was able to hold on going the 7 furlongs. Next year, I think will be the real question for him. But moving into the fall, he's a very exciting 2-year-old, as is Reinvestment Risk, who backed up that fast maiden victory. Seems like one that might be more inclined to go longer distances perhaps than the winner. But these are 2 very exciting 2-year-olds. Now, on Sunday, we saw the 2-year-old fillies in action in the Spinaway, and just coming into these 2 races, it seemed like all of the quality was concentrated in the hopeful, and the Spinaway just had really drawn a very lackluster field, though a couple of out-of-town shippers dominated the horses that had been based in Saratoga all year, and one horse just dominated them all, as Vequist, who was coming off a second-place finish out of town, made a big step forward to break her maiden here, and actually ran a pretty fast race, all things considered.
Yeah, she had run a 90 in defeat the last time out. I'm really curious to see the horse that beat her, Niente, run back in that 4.5 furlong race. Who knows? I mean, it's quite a difference from 4.5 furlongs to 7, but this was a really big effort. She got a 106 TimeformUS speed figure for the win. She just destroyed the field here, so definitely a promising filly for Robert Reed.
Yeah, and I should mention, she did not even break that well. She actually was last away from the gate, had to rush up into contention. The pace of this race was fast, and she just took over and won for fun. I don't think there was a whole lot going on behind her in this race, as it kind of looked on paper this was not a strong field. But she's a pretty good filly, as she took a big step forward here. And her dam was good enough to compete, I think finished second in the Black-Eyed Susan when she was a racehorse. So maybe she can stretch out a little bit further. We'll see. But she was a pretty exciting 2-year-old filly based on this effort. Let's move over to California and talk about those 2 Grade 1 juvenile races that they ran last weekend, kind of the counterparts to the East Coast Saratoga races. The Del Mar debutante for the 2-year-old fillies was run on Sunday as Princess Noor, whose maiden victory we talked about on the podcast a few weeks ago. She had been so visually impressive that day, but didn't get a very fast speed figure. Once again, this Del Mar debutante, I haven't seen the speed figure yet. I don't know how fast the race came back, but she just won with consummate ease, was never really asked for her best. Seems like the sky's the limit for how this horse can develop moving forward. There's just obviously a lot of potential here.
Yeah, for now she has a 99 TimeformUS speed figure. My assistant does those races out in California. I want to talk to him because it actually looks like one that could be higher to me. He broke it out from the others. I'm sure everybody or most people listening saw the announcements from Equibase about GPS timing. So we are timing these races from video. So It's one I'm just going to have a discussion with him. But in any case, a 99 is pretty good. But I suspect I'm going to be able to talk him into making it higher. And by higher, I mean a good 9 or 10 points. I mean, if it was 3 or 4, I wouldn't be discussing it because I think maybe he was going a little bit too much off the projections. But we talked about that last race where she just I mean, the figure didn't really mean anything. We said it at the time, and it looks obvious now. She won as easy as could be. She set a slow pace that day, and she just looks like a really good filly to me. She's another one. I'm not sure how far she's going to want to go, especially based on her breeding, but she certainly looks good so far and has done nothing wrong.
Yeah, I will say the one thing about this race is she did come in very badly at the start and kind of took out her main rival who ended up getting pulled up in this race. So that made it a slightly easier spot. But still, she won so easily. And she's just got this massive stride on her. And it seems like there's no stop to her. I mean, once they got into the stretch and she was sort of set down, she just took off. And the rider just could basically stand up in the irons because she was doing it all on her own. I mean, I'm hesitant to make this comparison because she has not run the kind of speed figures that American Pharaoh has from the same barn, Bob Baffert. But the way she runs, she just has this really efficient way of moving that almost reminds me of what we saw out of American Pharaoh as a 2-year-old. Obviously, like I said, she's got a long way to go to be spoken about in those terms because she's got to run some faster speed figures, but there is potential here. And then on Monday, we saw the 2-year-old colts in action in the Del Mar Futurity, and Dr. Scheibel, who another maiden race we had talked about in this podcast, because he had kind of run this very fast speed figure in his third career start, seemingly out of nowhere, because he hadn't shown that much in his first 2 starts at Santa Anita and Los Alamitos. But he ran a big race last time out at Del Mar and came right back and won this Del Mar Futurity, beating the exact same horse that he had beaten in his maiden victory.
Yeah, it was impressive. I think when we talked about it, we had, kind of decided it looked legit. As we said, sometimes you can't explain why these 2-year-olds suddenly run massive races. They just, the light goes on and they figure it out. But he certainly did here. I don't have a figure from my assistant yet for this. I will get that later today. If I had to guess, I would put it at about a 108. It's not a guess. I mean, I did look at the worksheets that we use. So it should be somewhere in that neighborhood, and just a really good effort from him. Not quite to the level we saw at Saratoga, but he certainly looks promising. I think he's been sold and already moved to a new barn. Not sure where they're pointing with him, if he'll go in the American Pharaoh or not, but certainly a really promising colt.
Yeah, this is one where I'd question maybe how far he's bred to go or will ultimately want to go. He's obviously been very effective sprinting so far, but he's already outrun expectations, so he's definitely one to follow moving forward. Let's wrap things up with a couple more races from 2 other venues. Let's briefly go to Monmouth Park and just touch upon a returnee from this past weekend on Saturday in the Grade 3 Red Bank. Analyze It, a horse who had just completely fallen off the radar, hadn't run since finishing 3rd in the 2018 Breeders' Cup Mile, returned from a 22-month layoff here to easily win this Red Bank. I mean, he wasn't facing anything really in the way of legitimate competition, but he looked pretty good getting back on track in this race.
Yeah, it was a pretty amazing training job by Chad Brown. As you know, in TimeformUS, we show the exact number of days. This horse had been away 672 days coming into the race, and he looked like he hadn't missed a step. He ran a 125 TimeformUS speed figure for the win. I remember when I was looking at the PPs for this race, I was like, I don't remember him running 3rd in a Breeders' Cup Mile, but I was thinking it was last year's Breeders' Cup Mile. I had to do a double take when I saw it was 2018, but just another talented runner back in the barn of Chad Brown, who I think you got to keep an eye on going forward based on this effort.
Yeah, Analyze It was kind of like the newspaper of record of 2 years ago, where he had looked so good as a 2-year-old and had kind of been a disappointment as a 3-year-old, coughing up some leads in the stretch of his races, hadn't really won a race since, I think, the Appalachian when he, the first start back as a 3-year-old. But what I liked most about this effort is that he showed a new dimension in sitting off the pace and making that run with that burst of speed at the top of the stretch to take over. Obviously, it's easier to do that against lesser competition, but it seems like he's a more relaxed, handy horse maybe than he was as a younger 2-year-old and 3-year-old. So I imagine they could go to a race like the Shadwell Turf Mile next, the Grade 1 event. I mean, I don't see why they wouldn't, start thinking big off this effort. But it's nice to see him get back to this.
Yeah, for sure. And I only know this. It was the Transylvania, which was his last win. I only know this because I'm looking at his PPs.
Yeah, I think I said the Appalachian. That's the 3-year-old filly race. Let's close things out with one more race from Laurel. We've talked about the Preakness quite a bit on this show and how that field could be shaping up. One horse who I know has been discussed as maybe a Preakness possibility is Happy Saver, who scratched out of the Jim Dandy to instead run in this Tessio, and definitely facing an easier field here. Did what he was asked to do, got the job done. I have not seen the speed figure yet, but I know this is a horse that a lot of people think pretty highly of.
Yeah, I just did this speed figure this morning. He's going to get about a 115. I haven't even processed the data through my programs yet, but looking at the worksheet, it's going to be a 115, maybe 116. I'm never quite sure exactly how it's going to round out. I don't see the decimals when I do that, but good effort from him. He's done little wrong in his career. Actually, he hasn't done anything wrong, winning all 3 starts. He hasn't run particularly fast as of yet, but that doesn't mean he can't take that step forward, as we've seen many times in the past.
Yeah, this horse just has a really nice way of going. He's got this big loping stride on him, and when his riders call at him for his best at the top of the stretch of his races, he really just kicks it into another gear. And we saw that when he put away Monday Morning Quarterback in this race, who Monday Morning Quarterback in his own right is a pretty good horse. He had actually had a big trip in the withers in his last start before coming off this layoff here. We'll see if Happy Saver can compete against those horses coming out of the Derby and the Preakness. As you said, he's going to have to take a big step forward if he does so. But obviously, there's potential with this horse that has not really been tested yet in 3 career starts.
Yeah, I would assume that this was a win and you're in the Preakness race. I imagine that's why he was there, was scratched out of the Jim Dandy. So I look forward to seeing him. He's the kind of horse that maybe he'd be more interested in if it was the Belmont Stakes coming up at 1.5 miles, but maybe 1 mile and 3/16 will be up his alley.
Well, we got through all of that. Just a ton of racing to take in from the past weekend. A lot of top horses in action. Imagine many of these horses we're going to see in the Breeders' Cup in about 8 weeks' time. So just a lot of racing to take in. It's a kind of a quiet week coming up, Craig. I haven't really looked at the stake schedule. Obviously, Saratoga's over. Del Mar's over. Some of those circuits don't start up again for 2 weeks. So I don't know what's going on aside from maybe Kentucky Downs. So maybe we could do a handicapping podcast of that on Friday, but we won't be discussing the circuits we usually do.
Yeah, sounds good to me. I'm up for any tracks you want to do.
All right, sounds good. Well, everybody, thanks for listening this week. This was kind of a long one, but as I said, there was a lot of racing to cover. Remember, you can always listen to us on DRF.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Forum channel. Thanks for listening this week, and we'll be back with the TimeformUS forecast on Friday.